Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Of any place you could be this Tuesday evening, you just decided to spend your Tuesday with us. So on behalf of everyone at the California Endowment at InSal Riders, we thank you. Before I begin getting further into our program tonight, I want to really quickly acknowledge a few people that helped put this event together to make this evening possible. On behalf of everyone, again, Lucy Firestone, our amazing InSal Riders board member, we thank you for connecting us with Mr. Edward De La Torre, the Director of Facilities and Events here at the California Endowment, and Jennifer Vanor, Joey Bravo, and Donald Gatlin, the Elizabeth's publicist. Thank you so much for the several emails we exchanged and the conference calls. So, I want to begin tonight by talking about why we write. We write, for a few different reasons, right? Some of us write because we want to pass information on to others. Some of us very begrudgingly write because we need to for either work or school assignments. And some of us write because we thoroughly enjoy it. In 1996, a person by the name of Sister Janet Harris taught a large group of young incarcerated young people another reason to write. So Sister Janet Harris was a nun that worked as the Catholic chaplain of Central Juvenile Hall right here in downtown Los Angeles. Based on her intensive and extensive work, just working with the young people that were incarcerated, she quickly realized that more often than not, they had been victimized before they became victimizers. They had been subjected or exposed to neglect or abuse in a variety of forms, whether it was physical, sexual, or emotional. So she learned their stories by talking about them, and she felt, there's another way for me to help them begin the healing process from these tragedies that occurred in their young lives. And the best way to do that was through creative writing. So she brought in our very first volunteer teacher in 1996 to teach the kids incarcerated how to write, how to, just really come to terms with their current despicable circumstances, help them remain optimistic in a very difficult time in their lives. So from that very first class in 1996, we now at InSal Riders teach over 41 weekly creative writing classes in all three LA County juvenile halls. We serve over 2,000 kids annually. In 2009, our organization decided that they needed to do something for the students that were now being released to society. So we created what's called the Alumni Program. So we offer them reentry services and support. Every Thursday at our office, we have what we call creative writing circles. And that is an opportunity for our young people that have returned home to us to continue to engage in creative writing, because in many cases, their difficulties and their hardships are a lot more profound, post-incarceration rather than while they're inside. So, we really want them to be able to find peer-to-peer support and mentoring, now that they're out here with our alumni family. So at this time, what I would like to do is to invite my colleague, Ms. Darlene Frontudo, to come to the mic, because she is going to introduce, it's just a few of the extraordinary people we have the privilege of working with on a daily basis.
So as you guys all know, it's always better to experience things firsthand than to just simply hear about it. So we have three of our amazing alums here to share with you some of their pieces. And first we'll be hearing from Aaron Brown. Aaron was first introduced to Inside Out Writers when he was 17 years old, and 3 years later he has perfected the art of self-expression through writing. Then we'll hear from Yanni Bridges. Yanni participated in her first IOW creative writing class inside Central Juvenile Hall. She's now 22 years old, and she serves as a role model for other formerly incarcerated youth in several organizations, including IOW. And Daniel Busano, he first came across creative writing when he was 18 years old in Juvenile Hall, and a little over a year later, he's now an advocate for juvenile justice reform. So please welcome them, you guys, with a round of applause.
These words may cease to be beautiful, but they shall never cease to mean. Every tear is a milestone, a failure I have reached, or a dream I have achieved. Every smile drags you deeper into me, to my holes that are guilt-ridden into these cavities that are guilt-free, to an absence where my heart beats, to an absence that cannot be filled, that can only be grieved. I scream in a language you can't understand, like a religion you cannot believe. I am dying because to let a man think is to let a man be. These symbols, they hold a piece of what peace was once in me, and they help you to see a man that you may never meet, a man you may know but will never hold, but have to let go, even so. If I had asked you all what it is that you see when you look up at this stage in front of this microphone, what would you say? You can keep your answers to yourselves, of course. But in all seriousness, if someone were to ask me what I see when I looked in the mirror, I'd be speechless. And not in the breathtaking sense, but more of my major depressive disorder will lead me to believe that I'm useless, I am empty, I am nothing, and that no epiphany, pill, or religion on earth can make me feel better. This has been my struggle. And though it may seem minuscule to some, it is an uphill battle for me, all the way uphill. For a very long time, and even still sometimes to this day, I cannot imagine myself dying any other way than suicide. I can't imagine me falling off my motorcycle, or my parachute not opening, or natural disaster, old age. Just doesn't happen, doesn't occur. This goes to show that there's not a bullet on earth that can kill anyone, not just me, faster than depression. I remember times where every inch of me felt wrong, felt foreign, felt disgusting, and I just wanted to rip myself open. And so I did. I cut, and I cut deep. But I'll be the first to tell you that there is nothing, no feeling on earth like the disappointment of a failed suicide attempt. I picked up what I like to call, not everybody, an addiction to pain, and that was at age 12. I also picked up a pen. While I burned everything that I wrote in middle school, mother didn't like that one very much, I also burned ruins into my forearms, into my chest, into my shoulders. I dug graves into my neck, to my temples, into my wrists. Some scars have faded, though some are undoubtedly still there. But so is my pen, and so is my expression. I learned how to use a chainsaw about a year ago, and when you're cutting down small brush and tree, you might come across a spring pole. A spring pole is a limb that can be caught under anything else, but it's under extreme tension and extreme pressure. If you do it wrong, it can snap back and potentially kill you or otherwise harm you. So the best way to do it is several shallow cuts along the side to alleviate the pressure, right? You minimize the potential injuries. What I'm saying is that my pen is my chainsaw, and I am a spring pole. I can snap and I can break, and when I do, there is no putting me back together again. In my skin or on my paper, this ink is all that I have. These words that I produce let me know that there is still something inside me. It's validating. Writing is as cathartic as it is beautiful. It is as therapeutic as it is artful. And that is exactly why it's very hard for me to tell where I would be without writing. But to put things into perspective, I have a selection that I wrote on the last very bad episode that I had about 9 months ago. And while there aren't words that can describe or explain fully in detail what I felt, where I was, or to what degree, nevertheless, here we go. But I should tell you that these words are not aimed at you all. They're not geared toward you in any fashion. They were solely produced towards myself. I like to laugh more than I like to cry, but I cry more than I smile. Saltwater rivers run wild as the dreams of a newborn child. And when the tide should rise for the last time, I will be immortalized not by religion, but by art. And crushing hearts is the perfect place to start, shattering expectations without consideration or regard, because misery loves company on this boulevard, in this avenue, where my mouth moves only to reduce truth from something of virtue to an obsolete tool without use. Sinners, trauma, and some sort of busted fuse gave birth to a recluse, and it has instilled in me a thirst that threatens all that is in you and that pushes you to persevere. So you can hate just as long as you fear, and you can cry as long as you listen and adhere. The chaos is clear, and I can see your tears wherever they fall, next door or next year. You can feel me there, but I need to bring you here and make you see that your destruction and my vengeance can overcome any distance and raise hell right under your feet. And there aren't enough angels in this world or the next to protect you from me. I will destroy you, and I will break you down like a disease until your last bit of hope leaves. You will gag on what you believe and run from what you cannot see. This will be done in remembrance of me.
The welts on my bottom weren't enough to make me hate my mother. The burns on my hands weren't enough to make me feel like she wasn't a good enough example. She loved me. She was just a single young mother trying to create a way from a deficit. I was 4 years old when I first wiped away my mother's aching. I was 4 years old when I first felt empty. I was 4 years old when I first felt abandoned. Distress was her parental mentor. I was playing in the backyard one day when I heard the radios. From blue and red lights came uniformed men. Intrusive knocks penetrated through our little home like wind to a poor insulation system. Running into the house, my mother packed up my favorite things. Her beautiful smile quickly became grief. We sat in the back of the police car as I watched my home fade in the distance. 4 years old. I felt her chest sink in mourning. I felt her embrace me as if she was losing her life. I tasted her sorrow through my fingertips. Innocence is curious, so I asked, "What's wrong, Mommy?" She replied, "Nothing. Nothing." Nothing, as if we were both okay. Little did she know she could have prepared me better. Little did I know I was her fourth child being taken away from her. Little did I know she hid me to protect me, only to lose me for a reason that wasn't her fault. That she left my father because he beat her while she was pregnant. That she lost her other children because my father shot at her. That she had a mother who was addicted to crack cocaine. Little did I know she'd been on her own since 11 years old, that she'd lost hope. Little did I know that crushed my mother. I went from a fragmented love to a fragmented system, and I quickly went from playtime and showers to being fondled in the shower. After being introduced to a world of cruelty, I was admitted into a facility of high dosage. I mean, high doses to hide the blame. It felt like I lived in a cloud. I had to be reminded of who I was each day, so where does that leave my family? It was cold, I was alone, I was 8 years old. The last word was expensive, usually costing me about 4 restraints and a needle in my ass. I went from being tucked in at night to standing in line for Risperdal and graham crackers. Sitting in front of the judge, he had no other option but to detain me. I was petrified, but everything I could possibly go through in juvenile hall I'd already been through. The stale hall's odors were coated with hints of coconut soap. Preparing myself for another ride, I saw other young girls just like me with similar stories. I became comfortable. This became a lifestyle for me. I learned how to style my stamped gray t-shirts and distressed black pants. I learned which staff to befriend to get deodorant that would make my armpits raw. I felt more secure inside because I knew what to expect. I cried before my release because I didn't know what to expect. I used art as an outlet, specifically writing, because writing took me places. It helped me escape from this hell that I lived in, opened unwelcome doors to a refined me, channeled my trauma into an escape. From pain became empowerment, restoration through transformation. I had nothing left to look back to. I only had a future. I went from solitary confinement to community organizing. My name is Yanni Bridges, and I'm an alumni at Inside Out Writers, and you just went on a journey with me through my transition through the foster care system, the mental health institution, and the juvenile justice system, all before the age of 14. And I have to say that at that age, before I found writing, I was incredibly traumatized. I had no clue. I was incredibly angry, but I had no clue why until I sat down and I wrote about it. I didn't want to write. I didn't consider myself a poet. Now, I write because I want to make a change in the world, because that's what's most important to me, because there are other little girls and other little boys out there who went through and are going through the same things that I went through. I don't appreciate that. I write for empowerment. That's it.
Hello, everybody. So mine's a little different. I wrote an introduction. It says, "Hi, my name is Daniel Biswano. I'm 19 years old. I was in and out of jail since the age of 12. Finally, at the age of 18, I realized my passion was helping others. And with my experience, I could relate to many lost souls in search of a better life, because that's exactly what I want. In my long journey, I came across and got involved with many programs, but my most life-changing is my creative writing program, IOW. They showed me how to help myself heal through writing, and now here I am today learning how to help myself and hopefully help others." Here's my poem. "I'm lost, can you find me? I'm alone, can we talk? I'm depressed, can you hold me and reassure me? My pain existed in every inch of my body, surrounding me like the breeze from a hurricane. I couldn't be with myself because I hated that person. Writing was my passion. It filled my emptiness and it tore away my pain. It gave my life meaning. It showed me things I didn't even know I knew. Simply, it gave me something to look forward to. Each night while I was incarcerated, my last time in juvenile hall, I'd write in this journal, sometimes poems, but most of the time I would write about everything bad. So when I got out and I started to go back to my old ways, I could look back and be reminded of why I changed. After a few weeks of counting down each journal day, I started to realize it was helping me change. And it was helping me cope with my harsh realities, letting all my anger out or pain or sometimes even sadness. I would think about my life, how my mother was abused and how I was mistreated by an alcoholic father. I would think how I abused my youthfulness, how I abused drugs and my loved ones with harsh words and evilish looks. Then I found writing. I abused pen to paper, and finally, instead of wet spots from long nights of crying, there were full pages of freshly written ink. Instead of tears and nightmarish dreams, I'd let the ink flow and my hard grip tighten on that golden pen. Instead of clenched fists and fast wings, I now had chicken scratch and ink smudges. I simply loved how it felt to write. I wrote letters forgiving my mom and asking the same. I wrote poems about my childhood in jail or my abusive, violent, drug-addicted home. I forgave myself, then forgave others. Creative writing saved my life. I was trapped in my own web of death. The only way out was with ink and pen. It's amazing how much writing can heal. Sometimes spilling your emotions and other times using your imaginations. I sometimes think about others and their stories, how hard their lives were, but yet how happy they were. Writing is a connection and powerful. It brought me together with IOW. It opened doorways for me. Writing showed me a path and gave me the tools to use it. Writing gave me my heart back. It helped me pull back the flaps from my eyes so I could actually see instead of being blinded by pain and past. Writing is so amazing. I remember me and my mom couldn't sit in the same room for more than 5 seconds, but when I wrote her letters, I would write pages, crying and laughing and thanking her for being there and not giving up, thanking her for her never-ending love. It was amazing. I actually could tell her how I felt. It brought peace to me. It showed me that there was something good still inside, slowly growing until it finally forced its way out to the surface. And with each word and splatter of ink, my mind and heart became more in tune. Instead of fighting against myself, I would fight to spill the words out on paper and let my mind reminisce about good, bad, hurtful, and painless and unforgettable moments and memories. Writing reminded me of who I am and who I don't want to be. It helped me realize what I needed to change and gave me a family to help support that change. Now, I love the ink that drizzles on this paper. I'm grateful to now have my love, ink, pen, and paper.
Standing in front of a room full of strangers and sharing such intimate, personal, heartbreaking accounts of anyone's life is extremely difficult to do. So can we please acknowledge again the courage.
Oof, I'm a little short there. Okay. All right, so now I have the pleasure and honor of introducing Professor Elizabeth Alexander. She's a poet, essayist, playwright, and teacher. She holds degrees from Yale University, Boston University, and the University of Pennsylvania. In 2009, she composed and delivered a praise song for the day for the inauguration of President Barack Obama. She has written 6 books of poems, 2 collections of essays, and a play. And her book of poems, American Sublime, was one of 3 finalists for the Pulitzer Prize and was one of the American Library Association's notable books of the year. She has also won awards for her teaching. Professor Alexander is currently a chancellor of the Academy of American Poets and the inaugural Frederick Eastman Professor of Poetry at Yale University. She is the former chair of African American Studies Department at Yale University, and her memoir, The Light of the World, has just been released to great acclaim. Please welcome Elizabeth Alexander.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight. And thank you to everyone who made this possible. I know it was a great collaborative effort. And thank you all so much for sharing your writing. I appreciate your bravery and your courage and your devotion to the word, something that we share, something that will sustain you, something that will carry you. It takes courage to say who you are. So thank you very, very, very much. So I want to share a little bit with you tonight of my memoir, The Light of the World. I've been a writer for a long, long time. Long time. And while there is always some of me in that writing, while that writing is made of me, I never thought I would write a memoir. I never thought that I would write something in the first person in the way that you all have that says, this is what happened to me. This is what I want to share. But sometimes life tells you that there's something that you have to share. And what I knew when very suddenly out of the clear blue sky, I lost my beloved husband, father of my children. He dropped off the face of the earth, perfectly healthy man, died of cardiac arrest. A remarkable man, a man who lived through war, a man who had seen death and destruction up close, and a man who was the most joyous human being I ever had the opportunity to know. So I knew that in his absence, that in the survival and moving forward, that there was something to say. Writing for me was a lifeline. Writing for me was a whole nother thing from what it had been all of these hundreds and hundreds of years that I've been doing it. And writing was a way not only to talk about someone extraordinary. The book is called The Light of the World. It thinks about what does it mean when there are those people, all of us have a light. What does it mean to shine your light? What happens to survivors when that light is extinguished and we're plunged into that darkness? And what does it mean to try to find it again? What is indelible after loss? What do we hold on to? That's what I wanted to write about. So I'll share some little bits with you. Because, you know, again, before I read, I think that what we all know, but what bears saying, is that I can look at any of you and you can look at me and we don't know what each other is carrying. We don't know unless we share it. It's as simple as that. Fikre was born in East Africa, in Asmara, Eritrea's capital, in the midst of a 3-decade-long war with Ethiopia for independence. There the story begins. Almost every family lost a child during those long war years. Fikre's eldest brother, Kebere, was always described as a freedom fighter who fell in battle. The dictator Mengistu Haile Mariam's Red Terror claimed legions of young people in Eritrea and Ethiopia, 500,000 by Amnesty International's final count. And years later, he was convicted of genocide in absentia while in protected exile provided by Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe. Fikre's parents' bravery was in constant evidence during those years. They faced down soldiers who broke into their home while the children hid in the bedroom, and when Fikre was a teenager, his mother retrieved him from the front lines where he'd gone to enlist and promptly arranged for him to leave the country. So at 16, Fikre was a refugee, first in Sudan, then Italy, then Germany, and finally in the United States at the age of 19 in San Jose, New York City, and then for almost 30 years in the perhaps unlikely place of New Haven, Connecticut. In a 2000 artist statement, Fikre told his story and described himself and his creative influence. He was a chef and a painter. I started painting 10 years ago, but I suspect I have been metaphorically doing so all my life. When I started painting, I just did it. I had never felt a stronger urge. The pieces that flowed out of me were very painful and direct. They had to do with the suffering, persecution, and subsequent psychological dilemmas I endured before and after becoming a young refugee from the Independence War. Painting was the miracle, the final act of defiance through which I exorcised the pain and reclaimed my sense of place, my moral compass, and my love for life. Black men die more catastrophically across class than anybody else in America. Toni Morrison, not a house in the country ain't packed to the rafters with some dead Negro's grief. He was an African man, an Eritrean man, and an African-American man. He was a black man. He was not the descendant of slaves. He literally walked across his country through killing fields to escape when he was 16 years old into the dust of Khartoum. He went years without seeing his parents. His parents and community built him to survive, but it was not without price. His big heart burst. The autopsy later tells us his arteries were blocked nearly completely, despite the fact that he was slim and energetic, ate yogurt and blueberries and flaxseed, despite the fact that he passed stress tests with flying colors. I learned that severe heart disease is first discovered in 1 of 5 sufferers after they drop dead. He could never quit smoking, though he tried and tried over and over and over and over. Heart disease is the leading cause of death in the United States. He was probably dead before he hit the ground, the emergency room doctor and the coroner and the cardiologist later tell me. That is why there was no blood on the floor. He might have felt strange, the doctors told me, before what they call the cardiac event, but not for more than a flash. One tells me he is certain Fikre saw my face as he died. We are meant to take comfort in this knowledge, if knowledge it is. This moves around in time. So this is back to the scene after my son has found him and I've gone to him. I breathed into his mouth. He was supple. The 911 operator asked if my husband was breathing, and I could not say. The air around him was warm and vaporous. How many times that day and in following days and weeks and months did I say, my husband died unexpectedly. I just lost my husband. Lost implies we are looking. He might be found. I lost my husband. Where is he? I often wonder. As I set out on some small adventure, some new place, somewhere he does not know, I think I must call him, think I must tell him, think what would he think what he thinks, know what he thinks. When I held him in the basement, he was himself, Fikre. When I held him in the hospital as they worked and cut off his clothes, he was himself. When they cleaned his body and brought his body for us to say goodbye, he had left his body, though it still belonged to us. His body was colder than it had been, though not ice cold nor stiff and hard. His spirit had clearly left as it had not left when we found him on the basement floor, and I knew that he could hear us. Now I know for sure that the soul is an evanescent thing and the body is its temporary container, because I saw it. I saw the body with the soul in it, I saw the body with the soul leaving, and I saw the body with the soul gone. He who believed in the lottery, he who did not leave a large carbon footprint, he who never met a child he didn't enchant, he who loved to wear the color pink, He whose children made him laugh until he cried. He who never told a lie. He who majored in physics, who knew the laws of the universe. He who wanted to win the lottery for me. Hundreds of lottery tickets. Like, you buy one, you buy two, hundreds. Found them everywhere after he passed. You were 6 and your brother was 4, my mother said. The whole day passed, a lovely day, and at the end I knew something was different, but I wasn't quite sure what. Ah, that's it, I said to myself. Nobody cried today. For the first time in 6 years, nobody cried today. We used to laugh at that story when my boys were young and the cries would come and go, dried up by the vanished sunlight like summer storms, fast finished but ever present. I thought of that phrase tonight, nobody cried today. It is 10 months, almost 1 year. I did not cry today. I cried yesterday. I may well cry tomorrow, but I did not cry today, and neither did either of my sons, though mostly I am the one who still cries. It is not an accomplishment, just an observation, but one that marks the passage of time. The next day, Simon weeps, remembering the day his father died, remembering finding him, being the first to find him, wondering if dying hurt him, remembering that the last thing his father said to him before he went downstairs to the treadmill was a cheerful, "Check on me." "You did check," I tell him. And then I came, and then brother. And we were there with him when his soul left the room. He was in his own home, and he was with us. The tears subside and melt into a few strong shudders. A bit later, from the shower, Simon calls out to me, "I was a 10 in sadness when I was crying, Mama, but now I am a 6. "Whoop," he said, "it just went down to 5. He comes out of the shower and puts on his pajamas. Now it's just a 3. He brushes his teeth. "Now it's all gone," he said. "We were with Daddy when he died." How much space is there for remembering in a day? How much should there be? I think about this in my poetry. I don't want to be a nostalgist, yet I feed on memory, need it to make poems, the art that is made of the stuff I have, my life and the world around me. I am grateful for the tug of the day that gets us out of bed and propels us into our lives and responsibilities. Memory can be a weight on that, and yet in it floods, brought willfully or brought on by a glimpse, a glance, a scent, a sound, one note, the timbre of his voice. There will never be goodbye, and yet it will close something down because we have moved to New York, and I feel its urgent press further away from me, even as I know the grieving continues, a huge, intricate, multi-branched choral, sharp and beautiful at the same time. Did we leave him in the garden? Did we leave him in the Grove Street Cemetery? The day we have packed the car, turned the key, and are leaving town, we've planned to visit the cemetery, but are delayed at a doctor's appointment. The cemetery closes. Mr. Cameron, who has been the caretaker forever and is probably 90 years old, comes at 6 a.m., 7 days a week, and closes the gates at 3:45. "It's okay," Simon says to Solos and my upset. "If we can't leave now, we can never leave." And then he says, "The grave reminds me of Daddy's death, but I want to remember Daddy's life." I dream we are moving, my family of 4, Lizzie, Fikre, Solomon, and Simon. It is light and easy. We laugh with the boys as we sort through and throw things away. Fikre carries and moves large bags and objects, the African ox, sturdy and purposeful. The boys move as oxen as well. We are glad to be going wherever we are going. Then the children evaporate from the dreamscape, and it is just the 2 of us walking a long, gently curved road, holding hands. At a fork in the road, Fikre lets my hand go and waves me on. "You have to keep walking, Lizzie," he says. I know it is the only truth, so I walk. I look back, I can still see him smiling and waving me on. It was the 2 of us walking the road, and now he has let my hand go. I walk. I can always see him. His size does not change as I move forward. He is 5'9.5", exactly right. I can still feel the feel of my hand in his hand as I walk. I wake, and the room is flooded with pale yellow light. Thank you.
I think I speak for everyone in this room when I say that we can really just listen to you read all night. And I thank you so much for sharing that. It was truly beautiful. What I would like to do, Elizabeth, is, Darlene read this amazing bio on you, highlight all your credentials. But I think a lot of us in this room would like to know, who exactly is Elizabeth Alexander? Can you share a little bit about your childhood, how you grew up, and how you became the amazing author you are today?
Well, it's turned on. So I was always a kid. There are a lot of dreams in this book, and if you ask my mother, she would say that I was always a child who had dreams and who very urgently needed to share those dreams every morning. Wild dreams, crazy dreams, fascinating dreams. I didn't always know that I would be a poet. I didn't always know that I would be a writer, but I knew that I loved stories. I knew that there was more to know than happened when we were awake. I knew there was more to know than we always perceive in the moment. And I wanted to be alert to those possibilities. My childhood was very happy. My childhood was very nurturing. I have one brother. I was born in New York City, Harlem, USA. I grew up in Washington, D.C. And there was a great deal of interest and support in whatever it was that we wanted to do. But there was always the matter of the inner life. And I keep turning to you all because you all have shared inner life with us so powerfully. The things that went on that didn't live outside, the things that went on that I worried about, that I was interested in, that I was obsessed with. And I think that some kind of creativity was always where I thought that might go or where I wanted that to go. And I didn't know quite what that creativity would be for some time. Education was very, very important in my family. That was a given. That was with my mother, who was of the master of a certain kind of generational, you raise an eyebrow, you don't have to say anything. Everything is made very, very clear without much explanation. So that was the way she governed. So there was no question of, for a while, there's I want to be a dancer. I want to go and do the, and just a raised eyebrow, and then next thing I knew, I was getting a PhD. That was how she operated. It's very powerful mojo. I have only a diluted version of it. And so what I also knew pretty early on when I was in college was that I wanted to teach in some kind of way. I went to college at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. Yale is a very, very wealthy institution with all kinds of beautiful, moneyed, amazing things, living in one of America's poorest cities, living in a city with a tremendous amount of struggle and violence and difficulty. And so for me, the question was always, well, what's the relationship of this to that? Even when my children were very, very little, you could see just like the edge of that stage. They'd say, oh, where'd the brown people go? Or, oh, how come the houses are shacky now? Oh, well, how come? Very, very visible. So my teaching started early, teaching dance, teaching writing, working in the Hill community, and always being very excited by the energy that young people brought. Because that's an energy, it's an exhausting energy. It's an energy like no other. I mean, sometimes I would go do day-long workshops at Hill House High School. I would take to my bed. There was so much energy in the room. But what comes back was like nothing else. Even when it's challenging working with all of that energy, it was always something that I needed. For me also, my devotion as a scholar, and this is also something, I keep turning to you all because you're what it's about, is that I think that in order to get better as writers, we have to read. And for me, that reading has happened in the tremendous, miraculous bounty of especially the African American literary tradition. the tradition of the culture of people of color that is at the center of this country, without which there is no American culture, right? Those riches, those treasures, that excellence, music, the poetry, the dance, that's what I wanted to share with other people in my teaching. That's what I wanted to be an expert on. That's what I wanted to keep learning about. And so I find that having that teaching life continually regenerates what it means to then go back to my writing. So the two have always gone hand in hand. And also, of course, because no poet ever made their living writing poetry. The teaching is the day job, and the teaching has been quite a glorious day job. And what I'm also proud that I've been able to do is to build African American studies and contribute to that tremendous field of knowledge, and to help encourage other people to contribute to that field of knowledge. That's work that I'm very, very proud of. So this Fikre, who I told you about, in the book, in the whole book, how do you know that you're grieving? Why do we grieve? Well, we grieve because we love. We grieve because we miss something that we had, or something that we long for, and something that was beautiful, something that was important. So what I knew immediately after his passing was that I was just lucky to have been loved like that I was just lucky to have these children, to be entrusted with Solo and Simon, and to be able to be their mother. So out of that good fortune, that was sort of the turn. I'm a Gemini, and they say that Geminis have a few flips in life. So one of the flips was starting this period of life and making a family. And something I've been thinking and talking about a whole lot that's really, really important is in thinking about the love of two people that sparks, that it's not enough for that love to just exist for a duet. That's hoarding something the world needs. If love makes you bigger, if love makes you better, if love makes you greater, love should make you more generous. And so that love, which is light, needs to radiate out from the center. So we always operated that way. Our children are 500. I came from a tiny family. He came from, Lord have mercy, so many people. One time a friend said, there's a whole lot of Africans on your lawn, And so, someone needs to get their papers, someone needs to, go to college, somebody needs to get a doctor, somebody needs this, somebody needs that. So we tried to live in that spirit of generosity. And also I feel that with teaching, again, so much comes back to me, it's a cycle, but that spirit of moving it outwards, I think is what romantic love ought to spark. So that's me. And that brings us to just about now, writing a book, having written books of poems all my life, writing a book that is not a book of poems, but is a poet's book. I heard you talking about, I was peeking at your paper, and I was looking at, you were talking about your poems, and I was looking at how it was arranged. And I think that there is poetic writing that doesn't necessarily arrange itself in verses and stanzas, but it comes from a place of language, a poetic place. And so that's what I've discovered in writing this memoir, that it's a poet's book, even though it's not a book of poems. And because it has a story, grief is a universal. None of us outruns death. How are we going to live? Where do we find our strength to survive? What are our resources? I think these are questions that we all struggle with as we move through life, which is never without its challenges, but I think is also every single day filled with small and large opportunities for beauty and joy. So with this book, I feel that there are opportunities to meet people where they are and sort of open our hearts to each other and see where it goes. So that's the whole answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Like Jimmy said, I could listen to you all day. So earlier I shared with you sort of how I came to writing, and I just sort of stumbled upon it due to my circumstance. Can you just share a little bit like how you developed that passion? Is it something that you just kind of stumbled upon and said, hey, I'm good at this, or?
Yeah, I always wrote little things, and I didn't know what they were, but I did always put, from when I was very little, I mean, maybe 5, 6, I know that I wrote. I didn't think I was a poet, but I knew that I was compelled to do it in some kind of way. I knew I was also really interested in the way people talked and storytelling. And I would listen to the people around me and my family. My grandmother came from Alabama. She talked one kind of way. My grandfather came from Jamaica. He talked another kind of way. My father, both my parents came from Harlem. My mother spoke the Queen's English of Harlem. My father could speak that too, but cursed just dazzlingly, gorgeous, dazzling. His use of the language was just extraordinary. And so I thought, isn't this interesting, all of these different ways that people around me are talking? And so I feel like that was part of what made me want to write too, because I knew that words could be used in different ways, and that was really exciting. And then I tried to do other kinds of writing. I worked as a journalist for a little while. I wrote fiction for a little while, but poetry was ultimately what I settled on. And again, all along, if I didn't necessarily know I was a good writer, I knew I was a good reader. Yeah. And I knew that they had something to do with each other for me. Yeah.
That leads perfectly into my next question for you, Elizabeth. So as our alums shared earlier, they have suffered tremendous heartache, and they're really young. You yourself have recently suffered tremendous heartache. The Lie of the World is such a beautifully written book. When I received it, I instantly devoured it. And in my opinion, in my humble opinion, I think that it may very well be your masterpiece. The love that you have for Fikre was so clearly evident on the pages, on every single page of that book, and it really flowed off the pages into my heart. So I'd like to ask you what it was like, the journey to write this book.
Yeah, I think extreme circumstances sometimes take us to the core of who we are in some kind of way. And so what I knew was that writing was a way of grounding myself in the earth. It was very, very physical. I really would think, if my feet are on the ground, if my hand is on the paper and my hand is on the table, then the earth is not spinning. The earth hasn't been pulled out from under me, because I felt like the earth had been pulled out from under me. I would lie down on the ground and I would think, the earth will hold me, won't it? And I wasn't sure. So I would just feel my weight on the ground and think, it's still holding me. And writing felt like a physical extension, not even writing to say this happened and that happened, but just writing little phrases that seemed to capture and freeze time for a minute when it seemed that time was speeded up and something had been made so out of order. Writing stopped everything. And then in writing about Fikre and writing about our life together and in telling his story, there are a lot of one of the things you learn in African American literature is that, and one of the reasons it's so wonderful to be in our field is that so many of our stories either haven't been told or they've been distorted. So we can just go to the archive and find this incredible stuff and it's all there. And so too with so many immigrant stories to this country, so many stories. So as far as I know, there's not any book out there about someone who came from Little Eritrea and made their way here, let alone someone who was an artist. And I thought, what will happen to his story? He's touched us and we'll never forget that, and that's good. But this person who touched so many people, who was so extraordinary, and as through any of our stories, you can tell something about history, place, time. We all exist in history and in time. So it just seemed like fixing him, describing him before something slipped away, even though, of course, our loved ones don't actually slip away, but I didn't fully know that. So that was why I just kept going.
It was so, I was so intrigued on just by how thoughtful he was, and how you described how thoughtful he was, and how he connected to just like humanity as a whole. You know, that was so amazing. Like, as I read your book, as you know, with Inside Out Writers, we use creative writings with our young people who've gone through so many traumatic events in their life. I kind of wanted to know, like, how has art played a role in your children's, like, healing?
Yeah, I don't altogether know yet, you know? You were talking about your daughter, who's such a talented writer and leaves, you know, beautiful quotations on the refrigerator. And my son, Simon, he talks real pretty. You know, he has a very, very unique way of seeing the world. He's a trip. He is really very highly original, this child.
This one is the
He's 15.
Oh, he's the 15.
Yeah, he's 15. I feel he is artistic, although I don't know what that will mean. You know, I mean, he invents things. So I actually hope he gets a patent, you know, and invents something remarkable. My older son, who is very, very, very devoted to justice, he's 17 years old, and I don't know what he'll end up doing. I'm so proud of him. If I ask him what he wants to do, he says he wants to get wrongly convicted people out of jail and off death row. That's what he wants to do. He doesn't like injustice. And he's trying to figure out what are the tools with which he can do something about that. But he has taken up photography. And I think that if that is also something that brings him closer to his dad, because that was, in addition to being a painter, his dad was a photographer, or if that's just a wonderful way of moving through the world and having a little something in between you and you know, like I can really look at you. If I have a camera, I can look at you. But if I have a camera, maybe I can look at you even more closely. And so I think that that's one of the ways that he is moving through the world. One thing for sure that I think anybody can do that I think is a good thing that we've done is bringing the kids up around so much music, around so much art. You know, you can always play music. You can always have it on. You can always look at art. You can always think about and talk about beauty. Always, 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 always. And so there was, and to look at art that isn't always about, in Ficre's paintings, for example, you know, many of his paintings are very, very dark and sorrowful. You know, very, very about living in a war zone, about having your home violated, about his own terrible demons when he was on his own at such a young age, in very hostile places sometimes. So he painted all of that. He painted all of that. But then the painting shifted, and light and color came in. And so I think for him, and he wrote about this, I think that exercised something as well. And I think that is there for the kids to see as well.
Do you have a lot of his art just displayed around your home? And
Yes, displayed, stored, there's a lot of it. So we've shown some of it, and that will be the next stage, is sharing it with more and more people. And there's a beautiful website too, Ficre Gebreyesus. Well, I won't act like you can just spell that off the top of your heads, but I'll write it down because it's a beautiful website, and the work is really, I think it's very moving.
I was kind of imagining, as I read your book and you described his paintings and stuff, I was just imagining like so much color and brightness, and the dark part I didn't really catch at all, because you just, when you wrote about him, it was just so much love in it that's all I pictured.
Yeah.
So Fikre was a man of so much talent. He was an artist, he was a chef, he was a writer, he was a man of much wisdom, and in many ways he was a philosopher. There are so many lines in your book that I would love to just like pull out and use, but there's one that really sticks out in particular that I'm really intrigued by. And I quote, "He knew more than I did that we were not meant to survive, if not to profit for others, and I came from survivors," end quote. Can you please elaborate a little bit more about that?
Yeah, thank you for asking about that. You know, so here's someone who comes from East Africa. He comes from Africans who have not been enslaved but have lived through war. I'm African American. I come from people who were not, to quote Ntozake Shange, were not meant to survive. We were meant to build this country for other people's profit. That's what we were used for here. We weren't meant to survive and thrive and stand up on our own 2 feet and sing songs and write and do what we want to do. That wasn't the design. That's not how the country was built. And so what does it mean then to be survivors? What does it mean that we're here? What does it mean that you're here? That you are survivors who have found a way through the word and through art to survive? Well, to me, that asks the question, well, what do we do with that? What do we do with that? How do we spread that out? How do we use the opportunity, build on the opportunity, make it a communal kind of thing? I think that's sort of where I would go further with that quotation.
Thank you, thank you.
So we all have a story, right? And we always encourage our young people to make sure that they tell their story and it's their story alone to tell. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that you get more than you give up when you share your story?
That is an interesting question. Well, what do you give up when you tell your story?
Well, I feel like, when I've told my story, I always give up a lot of the raw, I allow myself to become really vulnerable, mm-hmm. right? So I feel like I always give up a piece of me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say that I think that what if vulnerability were actually a position of strength?
Yeah.
What if being open were actually a very, very potentially empowering position? Mm-hmm. What if being open meant that you could connect more deeply with other human beings and learn from them? One of the things that my dad always told me, and still tells me, is he said, always speak up because you never know who's listening. You never know who needs to hear what you have to say. And he said, sometimes you'll speak up to the whole room and nobody will nod, and nobody will amen, and nobody will say they agree. But he said, there is inevitably someone listening. You may not ever find out. You may find out next day, next week, next year, next 20 years. And I have found that to be true. So I think that it's only through opening, all that happens with staying closed is that we close further and further in. But with opening, it's infinite. I think that then the questions of vulnerability are just, self-care. How do you take care of yourself when you open yourself?
What have you found that? Because we talk a lot about it, when we do our writing classes, we open up so many wounds. Yeah. And it's so difficult to just close that and bring that back together, especially when these young people are going back to their cells. Yeah. What have you found that works for you once you've opened that to go ahead and close it again?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very big challenge that you're describing. And I think that it takes the kind of careful work and design that it seems that you all have put into what you do. I heard you talking about, safe space. We say that a lot, but that concept is really very profound. And how do we communicate to each other that it really is safe space? How do we not do more with the time than we can sort of kind of close up a little bit? Which I think is hard because everybody, once they start sharing and once they start opening up, it's a little hard to rein it in. How do people make commitments to each other to say, like, I'll be here next Tuesday? Like, I will come back. So I know that the next 48 hours will be hard, but we'll come back together again. What is that consistency in community? And building those relationships, that just seems very important. And again, something that you all have figured out. And I think, one thing that I think is really, really, really important for people who are under stress, and a lot of people are demographically under stress, right? And this is something that, I read the part about black men dying more catastrophically and so forth. Is I do think that, to me, that leads to the issue of how do we take care of our bodies, because it's all connected, so I think that's a part of the practice of opening up spiritually and creatively as well. Yeah.
You said that Ficre would always say, éramos dos, or something like that, éramos dos. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that was I found that was after a crazy road trip we took. This is a really interesting country, and we used to like to road trip because my parents were not kind of cross-country travelers, and interestingly, some of that, they were very urban. They were New York people. And some of that had to do with racial coming of age, where, just driving around here, there, and everywhere in your car was not what black people did, because you didn't always know where you could be, So that was, I'm sure there are people here who are of an age that when your parents say, pee before you get in the car because we're not stopping, and it could be 10 hours. That comes from a legacy of not knowing where you could safely stop when you're taking the trip. So suffice it to say, we were not always road trippers. But Ficre and I did a lot of road tripping, and to do it with someone who was new to this country and to explore the country in all of its different places was very, very great. And one of the beautiful things he did was he said to each boy when they turned 13, you choose a journey. You choose a journey, and we will take that journey. So to give you a sense of, Simon, and we still owe him the trip, he said, I want to take the Orient Express from Paris to Istanbul. Okay, so that's that child, But then the other boy said, I want us to drive cross country. So we had all of these remarkable road trips, and that's a long way of answering your question. Ficre and I had a road trip before, and it was just his way of saying that in the middle of the whole wide world, in the middle of the whole wide country, in the middle of the Grand Canyon, in the middle of the Watts Towers, in the middle of whatever magical place we found ourselves, that he would say, éramos dos, and that would be the circle around the two of us. So.
It stood out to me so much, and so I just wanted to get an idea of it.
That's nice. I'm
Yeah.
glad that stood out for you.
So we have a packed house in here. I know a lot of audience members may have questions for you. So I'm just going to ask you one last thing, Elizabeth. So what's next for you? Now that this book has been released, what's on your agenda?
So my agenda is moving around with this book and seeing what stories it connects me to. Plain and simple, on this journey. It's a new journey. It's amazing. So that's what's next. And I have tons of papers with me to grade. Because it's the end of the semester. So that's like next. But there's also this amazing journey. Yeah.
All right. So in closing, your husband did ask you one time, that what could be more important to know in a language besides thank you. So I do thank you. In my native tongues, Dolsha, Shisha.
Thank you, gracias, and salamat.
Oh, my goodness. Look at you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have some time for Q&A, so if you would like to ask a question to any of the panelists as well as any of the youth writers who shared their work with us, please raise your hand. We'll take them one at a time, and I'll try to get over to you as soon as possible. All right, first question.
So Faith says hi.
Thank you, Paula.
And secondly, one of the things I loved about this book was that you had recipes in it. And I share that with people because if you haven't read it yet, it's a bit of a surprise. But talk a little bit about how you brought those kinds of elements that are not traditional to see in a memoir to this, and why that was important.
Yeah, so there are actually recipes that you can make, very delicious recipes, if I do say so myself, that are in the book because food is, of course, food is love, food is cultural expression, food is history. If you don't write these things down sometimes, you think about when somebody passes, the person who taught you how to make this thing, then that is something that can fade away. I think food is a way that every day we can express ourselves, we can live well, we can tell the people who we're with that we love them. So I think it's very, very important. So in the writing, the recipe seemed very organic, if you will. In one where I was talking about his particular dish of red lentils, an Eritrean dish called tumtumo, which some of you might have had, that is very, very, very delicious. He talked about how it connected him to his parents in my writing, and then he talked about something else, and I thought, well, I'm going to tell people how to make it. I'm really interested in texts that are hybrid in some kind of way. I do not think that genre is absolutely inviolable and pure. I think that whatever goes in the stew pot, if you can figure out in a writerly way how to make it work, then try. The language of recipes is interesting, so you'll notice that in some of them, it's like a recipe like you'd read in the newspaper, but some of them, it's a list, and some of them is, so, when he, his bolognese sauce, amazing bolognese sauce, and so I give a list, there's this, but no garlic, because that was how he had a whole, how he made it. So, and so sometimes it's the language of recipes where I'm just telling you how I do it. I guess as an artistic choice, it seemed like that varied things up in an interesting way. But in a larger way, it made the book bigger and more alive for me. Yeah.
Another question over here.
Good evening. I am here because a very good friend of mine lost her husband last November. And so a few weeks ago, I was reading the LA Times and they had their book review. And I'm reading and I said, oh my God, this is exactly the process she's going through, having lost her husband. And so I ordered your book and it came yesterday. And so I'm here to hear you so I can go back and tell her. Here's my question though, and a concern. She posted her feelings on Facebook. And there was one posting where you could actually feel her hurt. And I'm reading it and everyone has, oh, we're so sorry you'll get through. And I'm reading her hurt. And then a smile came over my face because I said, oh my God, she was so loved. That's why she's grieving so much. So I wrote that back to her and I said, you are lucky, you're loved, grieve on. And I'm wondering about, because I noticed in your acknowledgement, you mentioned so many people, and I'm wondering, what was the most profound thing someone said to you about your experience and how that impacts you?
The most profound thing, because people said so many profound things. When I was pregnant with my first child, I remember thinking how interesting it was. I was a little dramatic about it, as I am about some things. I'm like, I am in the continuum of all women through time who have given birth ever. Not that I was the first woman ever to have a child, but that I was one of the millions. But there is something about an experience that is so universal that if you want it to, it can connect you to other people. And it seems like there's wisdom everywhere. So I remember the more visibly pregnant I got, people would start offering, you know, their opinions and their wisdom and all of that. And so I think similarly, you know, with loss, people have things at the ready that they know that they want to say to you. And so there were more than I could count. You know, one woman said to me, she said, I found that music helped. Don't forget to play music. And that was interesting because I was forgetting. I was forgetting that I could put music in the air. Now, she also said, get a dog. I'm not getting a dog, you know. That was not my way. So, you know, you sort of pick and choose. I think sometimes it wasn't even just the things that people say, but the actions that people took. So for weeks, my students, my graduate students, came at 5:30 every day with food. And what was powerful about that is that, like, I'm the mama, I'm the grown-up, they're the kids, but they were feeding us. And that was very important. And what was important was I didn't want to let them at first. I can do it, 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 I can do it. And it was my mother who said, like, let these children feed you. Let these children feed you. You know, so, I mean, so many things, those are just two, but it sort of felt like there was kind of a collective wisdom in the air, and some of it makes sense and some of it doesn't make sense. Some of it's for you, some of it is people do it for themselves, but that, for me, that's how it was. Yeah.
We have a question over here.
This question actually is for the Writers' Workshop. I was terribly moved by these lovely poems that these young people wrote, but I would like to know, how could we volunteer and offer to do something for you guys? Do you have a website?
Yes, we do. It's actually insideoutwriters.org. We do have a number of volunteer opportunities, including being one of the writing teachers that goes inside one of the LA County juvenile halls. If you email us, you'll find the contact information on the website. One of our directors will definitely respond and let you know the process. We also have opportunities for the work we do outside, including being a mentor to one of our amazing alums, or actually facilitating a creative writing circle in our office or a life skills workshop. Inside Out Writers with a W, yeah.
It's a pleasure to listen to you, and if I was one of your students, I'd feel very lucky. As I listen to you present, it feels like we could have a big class right here talking about all of our own personal experiences. One of the lines in the beginning of the book is, loss is not felt in the absence of love. And as you talked about the love between you and your husband, I was also thinking about the poets preceding you and the love that they hopefully created for themselves, between themselves and their art. And that is a very strengthening quality. If you don't have someone to love, it's hard to go on in life. And I was just wondering, what are some of the things that make it easy to go through the grief process?
I don't think the grief process is easy, nor do I think it should be, you know. So that's actually a true answer from my heart, you know. I don't think it should be. You know, I think that living in community, whatever that means a lot of different things. You know, you all talk about the community of the writing circle and, you know, the village, a word I like to use a lot because I think it can mean a lot of different things, and we create our own villages. You know, that can I think it is very, very necessary. But I think that, you know, you just move through it. I don't know how it is eased. I don't know how it is easier. I mean, that's my true answer. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Yes. Well, there's the mic. Sorry.
Awesome. Hi. So first, wanting to extend a big sense of gratitude to all of you who've shared your stories tonight, particularly Professor Alexander. It's always lovely to meet another African American Studies person, especially as one who lived in the African American Studies department, because that was a home away from home for me.
Okay, where was that?
At the University of Michigan.
Fantastic. Amazing people there.
Yes, amazing. So I think my question is to essentially any one of, even including the young people who spoke this evening. At the top of the year, I read an article from a young writer of color who talked about the fact that she was going to spend the whole entire year only reading authors of color. And I remember reading that and being very shocked by this, but then taking stock of a lot of the books that I grew up with and how much I loved reading. And Jane Austen was my favorite writer, but realizing how much British English literature essentially colored my childhood. And it's because my parents, growing up in Nigeria, that's the books they read. And it wasn't until I came here and became an African American Studies major that I realized that people like me had stories. And so I'm very curious to know from all of you, how do you continue to realize that you have a story to tell, despite the fact that history says that you don't have a story and you are not agents of your story? So how do you, one, continue to extend to the world that you do have a story and you do have a voice in this world? And two, how do you encourage other people to realize that they actually have a story to tell? So thank you.
Do you all want it?
Personally, because writing helped transform everything about my life so profoundly, I think it's important for us to own our narrative. I think it's extremely important because you don't want somebody telling your story. You don't want anybody skewing your story. You don't want anybody changing your words or what you represent. So I think I'm really huge on really having my perspective and my story shared by me, and people know fact-checking done by me. So I think that that's incredibly important for me.
It's important to me because I feel like if you could relate to somebody, you could help them through their struggles. And I've been through quite a lot of struggles myself, so I think I could relate to a lot of people like myself. I basically just want to help others with my writing, so that's the reason why I write.
So personally, I have to get it out, It's not, I'm doing this for someone else so they can come later and read it. It's, I'm doing this for me. This is why this pen moves. It makes me feel better. It makes me smile more. It makes me smile harder. So that's why I write.
Good evening, everyone. Kind of following in the same vein of this question, and again, it's directed towards anyone, the young poets or just Professor Alexander, really anyone on the panel right now. I guess, especially considering all that's going on kind of nationally right now, when we talk about trauma, particularly in Black experiences, young people of color right now enduring a lot of violence. One thing that I think, this is kind of a mechanical question really, is that we all here know the power of narrative and know how it can transform us and alleviate trauma, but how do you begin and kind of pitch this message to people who that concept seems foreign to them? How do you kind of rope them in and encourage them to see writing as a way of relieving trauma? Just how do you get that conversation going with people who this concept hasn't even occurred to them before?
You guys should speak to that, though, because really that's what the organization is doing. So.
Okay, so it's going to be on me. Getting someone to just like them, right? What they did was extraordinary. It's not easy to get anyone to really talk about, the things that are going on in their personal lives. And you could call it like just the way society is. There's always this image about, what's cool, what isn't. And imagine being in a detention facility and you have, on top of these things that you grew up with in the communities out here, you now have the element of having to always appear like untouchable, unbreakable. You don't want to show any vulnerability because it's, people are going to take it as a sign of weakness, right? So what we do is, we basically go in and we don't necessarily ask them to write something. We go in with the hope that they will by the time we're done like working with them or speaking with them. And the first thing we try to do is try to really just engage them in meaningful dialogue. Not about the superficial stuff that we talk about on a daily basis, but the stuff that really matters, right? And so I can share a story with you. And it was basically when I first started working with this organization. So as you already know, we work with those that are formerly incarcerated, currently incarcerated. And, I myself was a product of our juvenile justice system and our adult systems, right? So when I go into the facilities to like talk to the kids that are incarcerated right now, a lot of times I'm met with a lot of resistance. They'll just look at me and they'll be like, what the hell are you doing here? What do you want? What can you offer us that we haven't already heard before? So that's what they expect out of me. And so, when I first started with working with InSal Writers, I remember visiting one of our writing classes. And, it was in a girls' unit. And, the girls were already, participating. They were already writing everything. But there was this one girl that was sitting by herself on the side, right? And she, just didn't really seem to be like right there in that moment. She seemed to have her mind somewhere else. So I approached her and I asked her if, it would be okay for me to sit down with her, and she just kind of shrugged, she didn't look at me. So I sat down, I was like, so, is there anything you'd like to talk about? And she was like, just like that. She didn't even say no, she just shook her head and shrugged her shoulders. I'm like, okay, well, would it be okay for me to talk a little bit with you? She just shrugged. So I started talking to her. I started telling her that, I was once just like her when I was 16 years old, that I was, arrested during the act of committing a crime, and, how I basically grew up within the California prison system and the work that I was doing now. And, as I was sharing my story, her eyes initially were just glued onto the sheet of paper, right? This blank sheet of paper. And she refused to look at me. But the more I spoke, the more her eyes started to like shift upwards until she was making eye contact with me. And I knew that I had her attention. When I was done sharing my story, without even me asking if there was now anything she would like to discuss, she just started, writing on her own. And when she was done, she slid a piece of paper over to me. And for the first time, after 30 minutes of me sitting in front of her, she was just like, I want you to read this, but I don't want you to share it with anybody. So I read it. And then I realized, and this is why I love the work that we do, that this young girl who was only 14 years old, this was the week after Christmas, and, she had been arrested because she was basically a foster kid that didn't have a home to go to. She was a placement kid, so they were holding her for her own safety, and she went into the system without realizing that she was pregnant. On Christmas morning, she suffered a miscarriage and lost her child. So this is what this young person was going through. You know what I mean? And that made me understand why she didn't want to participate in everything going on, because this is what she had just gone through. It was literally fresh a week later. How do we ask people to write? Sometimes we don't. We just talk. We just share ourselves with them. Because one thing that I've learned throughout my time working with InSal Writers, as a student of InSal Writers, is that in order to really, truly reach out and touch someone's heart, we need to learn to speak from ours. So I guess, I don't know if that helps, but that would be my answer to that.
Professor Alexander, you started off reading from your memoir and talking about the ways in which Black boys and men and how catastrophically they're leaving, right? They're being murdered and they're dying and all of that. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, in the context of all the things that are going on right now, currently in Baltimore, earlier it was Ferguson, and all of these things. Can you talk a little bit about the responsibility of those who write? Not necessarily those who identify as writers, but people who write, and what is the responsibility of those that are in the process of witnessing and seeing the things that are happening?
Well, I mean, I think that in constructing your question, you've really started to answer it with the word witness. No, I mean, really, I think that the art of bearing witness, that's one of the things that we do, and it can look a lot of different ways. It doesn't necessarily mean this is what's happening here, at this very moment. But I think that is what art does, and sometimes bearing witness to a joy and a beauty that mitigates against violence is part of what art can do. I think that artists actually don't have responsibilities that are different from citizens, if you will. I think we all have responsibilities to bear witness in our communities with our voices, even if our voices aren't, always artful and eloquent. We have to bear witness. And I think that, that kind of witness and wish for justice is something that we all have to take on together. I think I also don't need to say that this is, needless to say, not just a problem for black and brown young men. I think, the poet Gwendolyn Brooks, whose work has meant so much to me, who's taught me so much, in her poem, A Boy Died in My Alley. She talks about what would it mean for all of us to say, that's my child. That's my child, And I think that is the larger and terrifying failure, is when there are people who look at these young men and nowhere inside of them can imagine that's my child. So, no answers there, right? Just the big challenge that we all share. But the word witness is so important.
Hello. My question is about when you're writing or when you're in the process of writing and you're probably having like a lot of different, actually like multiple traumas that are kind of you're carrying or you're holding, and working with populations or people that also carry those similar stories. Like sometimes it feels really painful to sit down and write, even though you know that it's like you have that intention to share, to grow, to release. Like, what advice can you provide for those moments when we're writing and it just becomes, it almost feels like it's a lot to unfold?
Yeah, I mean, writing and writing well is so hard. We started to talk about that today. When I wrote this particular book, I wrote it sitting at the kitchen table, and just some days I would just cry straight through, hours on end writing. Just crying straight through, trying to keep on moving through because I knew that I had to in some kind of way. I think that if we acknowledge that writing is difficult, if we acknowledge that change is difficult, if we acknowledge that witness is hard work, if we acknowledge that what we ask of people who make art is that they go deep inside. The poet Adrienne Rich uses the phrase, diving into the wreck, right? Deep inside, and then she says, I want the wreck itself and not the story of the wreck. I want the thing itself. So what we ask from artists is actually very, very, very hard work. Very, very hard work. So I feel like acknowledging that difficulty and having the same kind of kindness to yourself as a writer that you would have to your friend who was writing. So do that hard work, but then also be kind to yourself and just keep doing it. Is that helpful? Okay, I hope that is. You're welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
This really is a question for any of you. You talked about writing about the wreck, and I wondered when you write about the wreck, if you do so on paper or computer. And the reason I'm asking is in California, I've been listening to discussions recently about, that we're not going to teach our children anymore really how to write in terms of cursive, that they'll learn how to print. And I worry that takes away some of our ability to get it out, and that our only leverage then to get it out will be to put it on a computer. And so I wonder in your practice as writers, whether you write on paper first.
You guys should answer, because I think also there's an interesting, maybe a generational thing too, please.
I write on paper. I do type my memos, my like rough drafts and stuff into my phone, but I transcribe them later onto paper. It feels more real and more tangible. If I wanted to take my writing somewhere with me, I would have to take my whole laptop. I mean, I don't have a laptop, but I have to take, essentially the whole device. I wouldn't be able to take what I produce, That's like someone else's work, So that's what I do with my writing.
I also write on paper. I feel it's more emotional and intense. Like, I can't sit there and type and think about everything I've been through and try and put it into words. I'd rather just write it while I'm thinking. That's why I use paper.
I do both, actually, and lately I've been using my computer. It kind of depends on what I'm doing at the moment, and as a poet, like, things come up, lines, everything that you see becomes a word or a piece of your work. So wherever I am, I just take notes on my work paper or wherever I am. So I think that it doesn't matter. It's wherever you are.
And I'm happy to hear that paper lives.